Hey, welcome to Clarksville Vibe the show where we tell the stories about people here in Clarksville, Tennessee who make this place the greatest place to live in America. I'm your host, Kevin Kennedy Jr. I'm a Clarksville native, been around forever, went away to dental school for a few years and have come back to the community, work here as a dentist, and am just excited to get to have this opportunity also of being on this podcast to share the positive and the amazing messages of great things that are happening all across our community. One of my main goals is to tell stories that you may not be aware of. And oftentimes that includes me helping to tell stories of things that I don't know a lot about. And that's today. Today's episode is something I'm really excited about, something that I am interested in, but it's something that I feel like I'm going to learn as much as you. We've got an exciting guest. We've got a special event in our community that's coming up. They reached out to me and said, hey, can we help talk about this? And as much as we want to promote the event, I actually want to learn more about the organization. It is the Gateway Chamber Orchestra. And our guest today is Greg Wolynec from Austin Peay State University. We're going to get to hear a lot about what the orchestra does, who makes it, what is their performance about that is coming up March 18th and 19th there at Austin Peay's campus. So if you're interested in just learning about different pockets of our community, I want to make sure you stick around to the end of this episode. Greg, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
This is really exciting. And as I said, one of the things that I really enjoy, whether it is talking to spouses of the military or people from different industries, is getting to learn more myself about pockets of our community who are really excelling and thriving and doing great things that make Clarksville look great. Sure. And the Gateway Chamber Orchestra is one of those organizations.
Yeah.
And so as we were talking before the episode, you are a professor at Austin Peay.
Yeah,
and so I'm assuming you teach music.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Sorry, no, I teach economics. Okay, fair enough. But so I want to kind of start off with just this softball toss of when we say Gateway Chamber Orchestra to a random community member, we kind of know what an orchestra is, but we don't know what Gateway Chamber Orchestra is or what makes a chamber orchestra different than what we might consider a traditional orchestra. Or is there a difference?
Yeah, great questions. Yeah. And that's a lot of what I spend my time talking about.
Okay,
cool. What are those three words that go together?
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, orchestra tends to be the word that people have an idea of what's going to be involved.
Yes.
There's going to be some strings, some woodwind, some brass, some percussion, those kinds of things. So then we ask, okay, well, that first word, gateway, where does that come from? Well, as I'm sure you remember, for years you could drive into Clarksville from almost any direction, and you would pass a sign that would say, welcome to Clarksville, the gateway to the New South.
Gateway to the New South,
correct.
That's what it was.
Yeah, and so way back in 2008, there was a group of us on the faculty at Austin Peay in the music department who thought, we would like to put on a performance so that our students can see what do we do in rehearsal, how do we act in performance, how do we carry ourselves. When I work with the student ensembles, and I'm both the orchestra director and the director of bands, so we might spend 5, 6, 7 weeks preparing for a performance. Well, professionals, everything is usually compacted into a single week. Okay. So this idea of putting on performances for our students, that's where we started. And in order to fill out the ensemble for that first program back in the fall of 2008, we knew that we needed about 15 players. And so we reached out to some musical friends from down the road in Nashville. Some of them were members of the Nashville Symphony, and others were prominent freelancers playing in the recording sessions. And we put together a group. And we thought, okay, now we need a name for this because 15 names listed on the front of the program made no sense. Yeah. So what do? You what would be a good name? And the deadline came, and nothing had come up. And I know early on we had said something about, Gateway. Oh, yeah, everything's Gateway in Clarksville. Right. And so away it went. And then the deadline came, and Gateway Chamber, at that time, Gateway Chamber Ensemble appears. So then there's three words that we don't. Anyway,
that's right.
So Gateway Chamber Orchestra eventually. And Gateway was simply because of the publication deadline for the program. We put it on there. And almost immediately we realized that is perfect.
Yes.
As we like to say, Gateway is a path to great music for those who haven't discovered it, and a path to new music for those who already have.
Very
and
cool.
That has to do with the way that we program, and specifically when we get to talking about this program, we'll see some instances of that. So that's Gateway. And orchestra, and then so sandwiched in between there is chamber. And that's the word that we struggle with the most, because I think that's the word that can be, frequently people can be intimidated by classical music. There's sort of a snob factor.
Sure.
I'm not going to know when to clap. I'm not going to know when it's okay to clear my throat, or, when do I have to, all of these
What do I have to wear?
That's exactly right. All this baggage. And what chamber really has to do with, we've heard the word symphony orchestra. That tends to mean large orchestra.
Okay.
Chamber orchestra, by definition, tends to mean smaller orchestra.
Okay.
We're typically of an orchestra of between 30 and 40. A full symphony orchestra might be between 80 and 100. There's not actually that much difference in what music we play, but there's a huge difference in how we play it. If you're in a violin section where you're one of 18, you really have no feeling of the same sort of investment. You're not able to make any decisions about how loud, how soft, how fast, how slow. The moment we're talking about a smaller segment, all of a sudden everyone really matters and everyone has to be a soloist.
Wow.
So chamber has to do with this ability to feature and get to know musically all of the members of the orchestra.
Very cool.
So that's a relatively long-winded answer to Gateway Chamber
but it's
Orchestra.
absolutely, that's a great understanding for people such as myself who don't have much knowledge about how do you get the name and what does it represent and how is it different than what we might expect or see on TV or see in media of different things. Well, so I guess my next question is you've got this smaller orchestra. It is a gateway, right? It also represents Clarksville.
Correct.
Are most of the musicians from Clarksville? Are they still kind of from different communities and you mainly perform here?
Sure. Yeah. So historically, the way that the group has worked, I can't believe I can start saying historically because it's been about 15 years. About 1/3 of the group is going to be based in and around Clarksville. This is home. This is where we work. This is where we live. And so Gateway is a natural expression of that for that 1/3 of the ensemble. The other 2/3 comes from two very different populations from around the Southeast. One portion tends to be professional symphony musicians who come in, whether they're coming in from Nashville or Chattanooga or some of the other Huntsville, these sorts of places. And the other third tends to be some of the top freelance and session players from around the Southeast. Some of that's changed during the pandemic. Many of the symphony players took that as an opportunity to sort of retool themselves and say, I'm still playing professionally, but I'm really picking and choosing what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do the day in, day out grind of a symphony. I want to be involved in the projects that really excite me. So it hasn't changed who's involved with our orchestra, but it's changed maybe some of those ratios a little bit.
Nice. So, outsider perspective, selection process, right? Yeah. So it's like, with different media outlets, like you get to see the inside of the selection process of how things go. NFL draft or selection process of our special forces groups, or how does a chef get this job? Like how does the team come together?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And there's not really a clear answer to that. So if we were a full-time professional orchestra, there'd be very clear requirements as far as how this would work. There would be, when there's a vacancy, there would be an audition. There's a whole series of rounds that go on where there's a blind audition, and then ultimately there's a finalist audition, and it's unbelievably competitive.
Wow.
Hundreds of people will apply for a single opening in these sorts of positions. Now, with something that we have offered as many as 7 to 8 cycles of performances a year, this is not an organization where anyone is making a full-time income off of it, certainly on the musical side of things. So what we have in place is a musical family that cares a great deal about the dynamics in rehearsal and in performance, so that when vacancies arise, we have an opportunity to try out performers over the course of a couple of different cycles and figure out who really fits well, right? And who really are people that are exciting, that bring something unique to the table that we want to continue to work with. We have a personnel manager who oversees that process, but it's very different from the way it would be in a full-time symphony.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is kind of team dynamics. If you think organizational leadership level, like you've got to have people who on the left side of this orchestra in this instrument section still have a good working relationship with people on the opposite end.
That's correct. And along with that, for so many situations for professional musicians, it is obviously show up on time. Yeah. Okay. Don't be the first one to start.
Is that a challenge for musicians?
No. Don't be the first one to start playing. Don't be for the last one to drop out. Don't be the loudest. Don't stand out. Those are all the things that make things successful in a really large orchestra or in a recording session. Yeah. Well, that's not what makes for a really compelling performance. Really. We want players who have perspective, who have interests, who have ideas.
I like that.
All right. Yeah. So the idea that people, and this again goes back to this idea of chamber, of smaller. I can remember one time early on in the chamber orchestra saying, cellos turn into the cello section. It feels like you'd like to slow down here. Now, I wasn't correcting them. I was just saying, it feels like you feel the music needs a chance to breathe right here. Is that what we want to do? And I had 3 sets of eyes at that point sort of looking at me, and another 3 sets of eyes that were looking anywhere but back at me.
Right.
And I said, I really would love an answer to the question, what's so difficult about answering that? And one member who is also a full-time symphony musician said, it kind of feels like a trap.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's something that we sort of get institutionalized. Musicians get institutionalized by the culture of the workplace dynamic.
Sure.
We're looking for something completely different.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So process of becoming the conductor, that's your title, right? Yeah. And so how did you assume that leadership role? And then
I founded the group.
Fair enough. That's how great things get started. How did you get to be the principal dentist at your, I started the practice. That's awesome. So you founded it. Now, I guess the next question
I was part of a team that founded it.
Yeah. But from the beginning, you've been there,
Correct.
Right? Now, creating something and pioneering something is a specific skill set, right?
Yeah.
It's a different skill set sometimes to then endure it, right? And so you see serial entrepreneurs with 3 and 5 year timelines, right. And yet here you are years later, or as history you would call it, right? Yeah. You're still leading this organization.
Right.
So what are some things that you've learned along the way that have kind of allowed you to still find joy in what you're doing on a day-to-day basis or performance to performance basis?
That's a great question. So I like to say that when Gateway started, I was 2 inches taller and had no gray hair. But things have changed.
Sure.
So, and as we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, the chamber orchestra started under the auspices of Austin Peay State University. Okay. It was simply a matter of faculty members wanting to put on this performance for students. And it was almost immediately at sort of the after concert hang, where we realized everyone was having a good time, and we wanted to do more of this. So that led to a second concert, and that took place in the spring of 2009. That performance happens. I send a copy of the archival recording, just the live concert, to a friend of mine who's a producer in Boston. Didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too bad. 2 months later, I get a phone call from Summit Records in Los Angeles. We'd like to record it. 2010, it gets released. The producer, Blanton Allspaw, gets nominated for Classical Producer of the Year.
Wow.
All right. 2010, we also decide, okay, we're getting a little bit more formalized, a little bit more structured in what we're doing. One of the things that we need to do is have a season. We need to be putting on 4 programs, and we initially started with the word Gateway Chamber Ensemble. It's time for us to change that. People don't really understand what a chamber ensemble is, chamber orchestra. So, first season, 2010, 2011. Second recording, Chamber Symphonies. Blanton gets nominated again. This time he wins the Grammy for Classical Producer of the Year.
Like Grammy.
Grammy.
Wow.
The Grammys, yeah. Fanfare Magazine, top reviewer for classical music, said of the very first recording, we recorded a piece by Mozart that had been recorded over 100 times. And the lead reviewer says, of the recordings that I know, including the top ensembles from Vienna, which is like the mecca for classical music, London, New York City, the top recording I know is this one from Clarksville, Tennessee.
Wow.
Right? Okay, so now we're getting to a point where things are getting a little bit more serious, but we've really outgrown the infrastructure of what we can do within the university. Okay, so talked with the administration at that time. President Hall was in place, and we said what we'd like to do is become its own not-for-profit, and this relationship with the university is still so important. And part of it, how do you fund this? How do you make this work? Sure. Right? If we can't really apply for the art grants, and it's competitive on campus to be able to get off campus to apply for grants. Yeah. So by 2012, we realized this is the moment where it's going to become a not-for-profit. That was sort of the major change, number one. Okay, so things had grown to a point where we couldn't be sustained on campus, it needed to go off campus. We had to file paperwork to become a not-for-profit, had to apply for 501c3 status,
all that
had
paperwork.
To put together a board, all of these kinds of things. That happens, and that started what I like to refer to as Gateway 2.0. Okay, because at that point, it's now its own not-for-profit. And now the funding model, now this is starting to get get much more serious.
Sure.
From the early days, I used to be involved with the grant writing. I would do the grant writing. Eventually, I trained a former student of mine to become the grant writer, and we started to build the infrastructure underneath it. My wife is from Paducah, Kentucky.
Okay.
The Paducah Symphony was formed at her dining room table when she was a child. Her mother was involved with it. And in that community, the orchestra started for the community saying, we want to have this here. How do we go about building the organization musically? The musical side of that organization took a lot longer to come around. Ours was starting from the musician's perspective.
Wow.
How do we build this within the community?
Sure.
And the moment it was its own not-for-profit, suddenly people start to assign traditional roles. And ever since then, we've been fighting to hold off those traditional roles, okay? Before we become what every other orchestra in the country does, why do we do it this way? How do we do it this way? So that's taken us on a really amazing run of building that brought us up to the pandemic. And it was at the pandemic where really everything stopped, as you certainly know. And we had gotten to a point where we were doing 7 cycles a year. 4 of these are masterworks. We've got 2 family and children's series. We're doing the Winter Baroque program. We've just launched Barbecue Brews and Beethoven. We're doing America's Haydn Festival. There's really important things that are going on. But it's not like we're running out of ideas of things that we want to do. And if you come up with a new idea and you want to do it, what do you do? Do you find new funding? Do you eliminate something that you're already doing that your audience has said, we want to keep this? And the pandemic forced us to just stop and go back to the early days, which was if we can come up with an idea and we can fund it, and during the pandemic was also, can we do it safely with musicians? Well, then we can do it. And that unleashed a whole new wave of creativity, which has resulted in what I like to think of now as sort of Gateway 3.0, which is the organization that's continuing to come out from the other side of the pandemic. We finally have an executive director position that's in place. The board has continued to evolve pretty dramatically. We have the launch of what's called the 2008 Society. So all that to say, there's been enough significant changes at different landmarks along the path that it has never gotten dull.
Yeah.
All right. It's frequently been overwhelming. But it's always
by the
worth
way,
it.
you're still teaching.
That's
full-time.
correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. But also there's a tremendous overlap.
Sure.
You know, as teachers, we need to be active within whatever the field is that we're doing. A great music teacher has to be a great musician. If I can't look at my conducting students in the eyes and say, this is the way you would work with professionals, this is how you bring along a high school ensemble, you know, then I'm not sure that I would be able to provide for them.
Wow.
In the way that it's the person that I am today compared to 2008. Completely different.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I'm sure most leadership stories have the same results, right?
I think so. Yeah,
you learn what you never knew you didn't know.
That's correct.
That's it. Yeah,
that's correct. And I like to say frequently with the Chamber Orchestra, and I'm sure that this is a good idea in business throughout the world. Anything that goes not quite the way we planned it the first time, never want to call that a mistake. That's a learning opportunity.
Sure, absolutely.
Second time, that's a mistake.
Nice. Yeah, there's your leadership nugget for the day.
That's correct.
That's good. Well, let's talk about this performance that you've got upcoming. So we're recording this late February, March 18th and 19th of 2023. We've got a special performance that's coming up. So tell us what we can expect. What's the name of it, and what does it look like?
Sure. So the title of the concert is La Pasión según San Marcos, and that's a mouthful in Spanish, just saying the Passion according to St. Mark.
Right.
And so where do you even start with this? So 2020, very tumultuous year for all of us, okay? And in addition to the pandemic, we had all kinds of things regarding social justice and just sort of looking around the community and saying, from an artist perspective, what are we doing to represent our community? What more can we be doing to represent our community? And so I keep a notebook of pieces that, hey, this would be fun to look at sometime. All right. And so I don't know, maybe 2015, 2016, I had heard of this piece by a composer. His name is Osvaldo Golijov. He's Argentinian, and he loves to mix worlds.
Okay.
He likes to take tango from Argentina and blend that with classical music or some other form and create something entirely new. And his music is recognized for the way that it blends all these different ideas together. So I was aware of him as a composer, and I became aware of La Pasión, and I thought, I don't know when we would ever get to this. Well, 2020, 2021, I started to think, I think this would be a perfect thing for our community.
Wow.
One of the things that we would have to do when we're applying for grants through the Tennessee Arts Commission is look at their state-generated information on demographics. And as a result of that, I knew a couple things about Clarksville. One, we are, and these are things I'm sure you already know, we are one of the youngest communities in Tennessee.
Right.
When you look at percentage of population that senior citizens were about 4% smaller than the next closest next closest county.
Yeah.
We're also one of the most diverse communities, and obviously some of this has to do with Fort Campbell, but not all of it has to do with Fort Campbell. We're also one of the most transient communities. So what can we do that would find some way of reflecting more of the demographics that are found here? Because a traditional classical audience is getting older and continues to be whiter than most other concerts or cultural activities you could visit. So I went back to that notebook and I found La Pasión and I started listening to it a couple of times. And I got in touch with the publisher and I said, okay, we're interested in doing this. The board and I talked about it. We talked with the choir and said, okay, we're going to make the educated leap that we can do this.
Yeah.
I had no idea what we were getting into. So this was fall of 2021, and we decided to do it in 2022. The piece was written back in 2000. Okay. Golubov was one of 4 composers, non-Western composers, not of European descent, who were asked to write a piece that was a response to Bach's masterpiece, the St. Matthew Passion, to celebrate 250 years since Bach's passing. So Golubov, in addition to being Argentinian, is of Jewish descent. And he said, I'm not sure I'm your guy.
Sure.
Then he did a lot of reading and a lot of thinking, and he decided, I think I would like to do this. And he created what I think is the most important piece written in the last 50 years. And it was performed in 2000, it was premiered in Germany, and it was written for a chorus based in Caracas, Venezuela, premiered in Germany, and then the group that premiered it performed this about 70 communities around the world, all of the largest metropolitan areas, New York City, Boston, Los Angeles, Caracas, Venezuela, right? All over the place. But the challenge was the piece defies description. And this is one of the hardest things. You can't put this on a poster. Like you just say, La Pasión, it's going to be amazing, come check it out.
Yeah.
La Pasión takes some ideas based around classical music. Mm-hmm. And then he says, okay, what if we looked at this from a different lens? What if we looked at this from a Latin American lens? And I'm going to decide that the 2 places that are going to be sort of the birthplace of this piece are going to be Cuba and Brazil. And I'm going to base this piece not around traditional drums. I'm going to write a different kind of piece that's going to use these Afro-Cuban drums called bata drums. All right? Well, this music is never notated. So what he did is he acquired collaborators. A guy by the name of Mikhail Ringquist, is one of the world's foremost authorities on hand drumming, drums that you play with your hands, and bata drums are always played in 3. All right, so you got the big drum in the middle, that's the mother drum. To the left of that person is the middle drum, that's the father drum, and to the right is the child drum.
Okay.
So Mike created...
One person is playing all 3 or 3 people?
3 people,
nice.
But the mother makes different commands of the rest of the group.
Okay.
And they have to respond to that. So
and it's not notated.
Traditionally, it's not notated. Wow. All right. I didn't understand this when we decided to do the piece. All right. Also, Golubov wanted a specific type of unusual singing, an Afro-Cuban folk tradition that there's not really a name for, but the person that was involved in creating that, his name was Reynaldo Gonzalez Fernandez. So I was trying to track down people that could help me understand the notated music. Yeah. And that's where I had my brand new graduate student last year in orchestral conducting at Austin Peay was from Matanzas, Cuba. Wow. She looked at his name and said, he's Cuban. I can find him. I couldn't find him anywhere. She reaches out on Facebook within 2 hours. Reynaldo's called him, has gotten in touch, and Reynaldo's explaining the story of the piece. And I now know Reynaldo is the only person that's ever played the role of Marcus. Only person ever. It was written for him. In fact, he wrote part of the role. Mike is the only person that has ever led the drumming of this. We're going to have to get Mike involved if we're going to do this. I can remember Reynaldo saying, if you don't got me and Mike, it's not going to go so good.
Yeah.
I thought, okay. So I got Mike involved. Mike says, well, if we don't have at least one other bata drummer that's a former person of mine, Marcus Santos, this isn't going to go so well. So we get Reynaldo, we get Mike, we get Marcus involved, and now we're saying, okay, that's the end of the outsiders. Everyone else is going to be right here, Clarksville, Middle Tennessee.
Wow.
And we put together the piece. Normally the chamber orchestra has strings, and there's a string section, violins, and cellos. They get to do some things that are relatively traditional for them. All right? We might use trumpets. Sometimes we use trombones. But those trumpets and trombones, they're not going to play classical music. They're going to play salsa.
Nice.
All right? We have to hire a guitar player who can also play a 3-string guitar called the tres.
Okay.
It's a Latin American folk instrument used frequently in salsa. We have to hire an accordion player. That's off the beaten path for us. We have to bring in a pianist, but that pianist has to be comfortable playing in a salsa band. We've got Mike, we've got Marcus, we've got David Steinquist, our amazing percussionist here, but we also need to bring in additional percussionists. 2 of his graduate students came in, and I haven't even mentioned the choir. Well, we have to train a choir, all right, that's going to sing entirely in Spanish, that's going to be divided into 3 choruses, then divided into 1 chorus, then 3 choruses, 2 chorus, 1 chorus. There's going to be choreography. They're going to clap. They're going to stomp. They're going to do flamenco. Off the charts.
Wow.
We had to find a Brazilian-style contralto singer who would sing jazz. Only 2 people on the planet had ever sung that role. All right? They were interested in doing it, but only if we brought in the entire original group. Well, that's not what we are. We're our own orchestra. We want our orchestra to grow from this, not be a presenting group.
Sure.
So I reached out to an alumni of the master's program at Austin Peay, Luisana Rivas, originally from Venezuela. She came in and did an amazing job. So we presented this last year. 2 weeks before we did the first concert, I was ready to jump off a building. I thought, there's no way this thing happens.
Wow.
And over the course of the production week, as we brought the chorus together with the different soloists, with the salsa band, with the orchestra, we finally got to a point where I thought we could do this. Golyav tries to portray this text, this unbelievably powerful text, using the chorus like some sort of Greek chorus of old. So there's the scene where Mary has broken open the oil, and all of the apostles are saying, how could you do this? Why have you done this? And Jesus stands up and says, because this was a beautiful act. This was a wonderful act. Well, the choir, while listening to this amazing salsa music, beat, bum, beat, dum, is saying, why? Meanwhile, we have this amazing salsa soloist who happens to be a graduate student in flute performance who's able to step forward from the choir and just bring the house down.
Wow.
So, I don't know. That's a whole lot of thoughts about this piece. The other thing that Golyav did is, in addition to the Spanish text, which is quite literal, he said, with my own background, I would like a moment of repose, a moment of hope for the future. We're not going to have the resurrection within the Passion story. We're going up through the crucifixion. But we need something that's timeless. And so he added a Kaddish prayer, which is a Hebrew prayer of death that never uses the word death in it. Oh. And so the work ends with the choir singing these absolutely beautiful sounds, the Brazilian jazz contralto providing the final text, and then the choir all together sings Amen and bows their head. And after an hour and a half of 34 different musical selections, with your attention on the drummers and on the singers and on the orchestra and on the chorus and the flamenco clappers and everything else, you could hear a pin drop. It lasted for almost 2 minutes. And when the audience started clapping, they jumped to their feet, and it was a standing ovation.
Wow.
So we did this last year on a Saturday evening and a Sunday afternoon, and we were pandemic limited because of spacing, had the capacity of about 200 for each performance. And immediately afterwards, people were like, we have to do that again. And I thought, we cannot do this again.
You don't know what it took to get here.
That's exactly
right.
So the next day, we had an executive committee meeting with the board, and I logged in a couple minutes late, bringing one of the guests to the airport. They'd already decided we have to do this again.
Guess what? You're up.
So we are doing it again.
Yeah.
And we are going to record it audio, and we're going to record it video,
Very
and
cool.
we're recording an element of virtual reality. But nothing can replace seeing this live and in concert.
Amazing.
It's a very long-winded explanation for a piece that I don't even know how to describe.
Well, to be honest, I appreciate it, because I think when you're talking to people who may not have a familiarity with behind the scenes, how do you even choose something? And how is this performance unique? I mean, this is not something that, was written, just randomly. It's great intention, great skill. You're talking about musicians that you're bringing in for specific roles that have very unique and what I would call niche talents, right?
Correct.
And they can perform this to bring out the full vibrancy of this performance as a whole.
That's exactly
It's
right.
not just, looking around on campus or in Middle Tennessee, if he's pretty good at this, but he can do this as well.
That's right.
You're, in my sports analogy, you're creating a very fine team of people with specific skill sets to run this performance and really bring out the full dynamic of it.
We had to bring in 3 people from the outside.
Wow.
The other 72 are all based here in Middle Tennessee.
That's really unbelievable. So, as a opportunity to convince families to come be a part of it, who would you say is, kind of your target audience in terms of age wise? And for someone that's maybe not familiar with this type of performance, why would they be interested in seeing this one?
Yeah, that's
and you've answered some of that.
Yeah. So look, a typical Gateway Chamber Orchestra audience, because we're based in this diverse community, and because we also perform on a college campus, tends to be a more diverse and also have a younger element to it than a lot of other symphony orchestras. So that's already a great thing. What would make the perfect target audience for this? So in addition to salsa and flamenco and tango and classical music and anyone that's interested in any of those things, we also had to bring in a capoeira dancer. And this is a Brazilian form of dancing that looks a lot like breakdancing or hip hop.
Okay.
It was actually, goes back to the 16th century. It was a way for enslaved people to train for combat by dancing. So there's spinning and all kinds of playing. The person that comes in to do this is from Nashville, also plays berimbau. So people who are interested in that sort of thing would be interested in this. People who are interested in having their horizons opened on all of these different levels. Is there an age limit that would be appropriate? I can't think of what that would be.
Right.
I think this is a piece that transcends audience. The people who would be most interested in the subject matter from a faith perspective are going to find exactly what they're looking for in this piece. People who are looking for these musical elements are going to find exactly what they're looking for in this piece. It's an hour and a half that passes in about, it feels like 20 minutes.
Wow.
Every 4 minutes, our attention turns to someplace else.
Yeah.
It's for everyone.
That's really fascinating. Well, thank you for the energy and the dedication and the commitment, because what I've heard from you is there was a point where I didn't know if this was going to work out. There's a certain level of determination where to complete the organization or the team that can make this happen, we've really got to spend some energy to invest in the right kind of people.
That's correct.
You've got to look beyond your sphere of influence, and you leveraged that student of yours and their influence to get connected with this individual. So the amount of work that goes into it, it seems a little overwhelming to me, but I know for you to bring it to our community is such a gift, because this is what helps our community grow. This is what helps celebrate some of the diversity that's already here. And let's be honest, helps attract some diversity that's not here yet.
That's
and
correct.
So when we can look and say to a growing community of these are the types of things that we can offer, not only have we done this in the past and we've done it at a very high level, you mentioned the Grammys, we are continuing to do this, and we're continuing to kind of push the ball forward and pioneer new things that haven't been here before, that you can't experience everywhere else. And this is unique to Clarksville.
That is correct. And I like to say it is a community defining cultural institution. We look at the tremendous growth of Clarksville over the last several years. All right, it's interesting to talk with people at the Economic Development Council. I don't think there's a lot of interest in bringing in more $15 to $20 an hour jobs. They're looking in bringing in a corporate headquarters and helping define Clarksville not as some sort of up the road from Nashville, but its own unique place with its own unique values and its own unique community.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you for what you do for our community and helping do that and helping make us all better and give us experiences that help broaden our horizon, as you mentioned. So I did hear you mention this before, and you may have just passed over this, and this is not why we're here, but did you say that you are the director of bands? Would that include the other bands on campus, marching
so I'm
band,
the orchestra
and all this
director
stuff?
and the director of bands, which means I oversee all of those large ensembles. So I conduct, on the band side of things, I conduct the wind ensemble, which is the top concert group, and then I oversee the rest of the band program. John Schnettler, who's the marching band director, director of athletic bands, does a great job with the marching band, the basketball pep band, and also our symphonic band.
Very fun. So you got your hands in lots of things.
Absolutely.
That's very exciting. Well, we're going to move to the lightning round.
Sure.
All right. Is there any place in the orchestra where instead of conducting, you were like, if somebody was sick, I could step in and nail this?
I could step in.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Oh boy. Okay, so I refer to myself as a recovering clarinetist.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I could do it all over again, I would have been a pianist. If I had the skills to step in and play the piano part for La Pasión, I would choose to do that. But I could step in on the clarinet section.
Nice. Do you have a dream music venue to perform in or conduct in around the world?
Okay, other than the Mabry Concert Hall at Austin Peay State University. All right.
Which I should say, I did mean to mention that earlier. I feel like that is often under-acknowledged for what a nice facility
it's spectacular.
it is.
Rob Report said it's one of the top 10 concert halls in the country.
Which is unbelievable because I would say a lot of the community experiences it through dance recitals and doesn't necessarily get to see the musical aspect of it.
Yeah.
But when you read the reports of the experts in the music field of that concert hall, it is just...
It's a spectacular space for concerts. It's a great place for recordings.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I've been to many concerts in New York's Carnegie Hall. I've never conducted in Carnegie Hall. And then in Berlin, there's the Berlin Philharmonic, that's kind of, the Music Verein Vienna. So there's 3.
Okay, nice. Good answer to things I wouldn't know about. If you could be on one old school game show, what would be a game show?
Price is Right.
Nice.
Yeah, for sure.
Throw it out there. All right. And as you get in your car to drive home, what is one music artist that we might find on your playlist?
So I've gotten into this vinyl craze, which obviously I'm not going to be listening to vinyl in my car, but I've been collecting all kinds of jazz reissues. I don't know. It could be Miles Davis or John Coltrane would be 2 absolute favorites right now. And Ella Fitzgerald, you can never go wrong with Ella Fitzgerald.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. From the musician himself.
That's right.
Greg, thank you so much for jumping on this episode. Thanks for bringing your talent to Clarksville, bringing your really long tenured skill and just persistence with continuing to expand our horizons and make our community better in so many ways.
Well, thanks for having me, Kevin. And I hope that listeners will check out gatewaychamberorchestra.com for information on how to get tickets, including a little video of behind the scenes for upcoming La Pasión, which is going to be on March 18th at 7:30 and March 19th at 4 o'clock in the Mabry Concert Hall on the campus of Austin Peay State University.
Yeah, don't miss it. Well, if you made it to the end of this episode, thanks so much. I know you've been intrigued as I have to learn a little bit of behind the scenes of how the orchestra gets developed. What does this come from? Where did we get the name? How did these performances get selected? How do the musicians get selected? We've really covered a lot for people like myself who just want to know on the outside looking in. And then if you knew all of these things already, I'm sure you learned a lot about what went into this performance, specifically from the talent acquisition perspective, from just the high level knowledge of the musical just gift that is being brought to our community. So hope you find it worthwhile to make it in attendance on one of those 2 performances, and then continue to check out the Gateway Chamber Orchestra as their performances continue to roll in over the years. Go back and listen to our old episodes because I know we'll bring you more content like this moving forward, but thanks for making it through this episode.